Right. Okay, declare that carried. And we now move to item number 14, and that's the decision to opt in to the first stage of the National Three Waters Reform Programme. In a moment, I'll ask Sarah, probably once again, to introduce the paper. But just to say, these recommendations ensure that we can participate in the process over the coming year, but they do not commit us to accepting the final shape of the reform recommendations. We don't know that shape yet, but obviously participating in the process, that means that we can help shape and form the recommendations, and the concerns that I've raised and others have raised on a number of occasions, in particular about whether this having a multi-council body would damage the accountability to us of water care. Secondly, whether now or in the future we would be cross-subsidising the water supply in regions outside of Auckland region. And third, it's really just to get a better understanding if the offer to us is to take our debt off our books, what will that actually mean in terms of our ability to undertake other projects or to better meet our debt to revenue ratios, knowing that along with the debt that we get from water care, we also get a revenue stream. But I'll ask Sarah, who's here, along with Alastair Cameron and John Bishop, to introduce the paper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'll just make a few brief comments because you've pretty much summed it up quite well there. So I think many of you might remember that about 6 or 7 weeks ago, there was the Department of Internal Affairs held a workshop at council premises about where they talked about the reform program and whether and setting out the process, the reform process over the next 3 years. So this paper is essentially giving effect to that, so agreeing in principle, as the Mayor described, to participate in that process. And they've essentially split the process up into it's a 3-year process split up into 3-year parts. So if we agreed to be involved in this first phase of the reforms, it would involve working with both central government but also our neighbouring local authorities, so Northland councils as well as potentially Waikato councils, to explore those very items that the Mayor referred to. So whether any greater aggregation of water care with other councils would result in cross-subsidisation and what that would actually look like, and what the governance of a multi council owned CCO would look like in effect. So if you were to agree to those recommendations, that would be taking place over the next year, and we would then be asking you to make a subsequent decision in June next year about whether to continue into the second stage of reforms, and we're under no obligation to do that. But I will just say that the carrot that the government is offering us to be involved in these reforms, which is the possible separation of the balance sheet, which may provide additional capacity to borrow, and therefore for both water care and the council. That is something we're investigating currently, and we would look to provide advice to you on that sooner than that's not going to take the whole year. So we'd be looking to provide advice to you certainly before the end of the year on that issue. And I think that's the sum of it. But I guess the argument is that it is better to be at the table and be able to influence the options than not. So yeah, I'm happy to answer questions, but I'll take the rest of the report as read.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Look, I'll move this paper. Can I have a seconder, please?
I'll second,
yes.
Angela.
Seconded by Angela Dalton. Right, now I'll open it up. I'll separate questions and comments once again. I have two on my list already. The first question is from Councillor Wayne Walker.
Okay, I've got a question essentially that goes to contestable advice. Is it possible for us to, that is the council, to have some contestable advice around a number of things? First of all, there's the issue that you raise in point 40, which is around the fact that, or the possibility that our debt situation may not be improved by separating out our balance sheet. And I would just make the request that we need really to have some information around that. And further to that, whether there are possibilities to change the legislation around water care so that the charging regime could be changed, and what other possibilities they are to deal with the debt to revenue ratio as it goes to our relationship with water care, other than by entering into this relationship with the government, which is one option we've got on the table. But what are the other options? And the other questions I've got go to the fact that we don't have a water strategy at this point. So the timing around that is quite clearly critical. And also the fact that water makes up a significant opportunity around climate change, and the fact that I think water care uses 670,000 gigajoules of energy a year transporting water and wastewater. So quite obviously having significant oversight over water is fundamental to council reducing its emissions by 50% by 2030. And obviously there are issues around sustainability. So if I come back to my question around contestable advice, can we have contestable advice around the issues that I'm raising over the period in time that this process with the government is taking place? Otherwise, we would end up, if we don't have that competitive contestable advice, with only one option on the table.
Thank you, Councillor. I think I've got Kevin Ramsay on the call. If you're there, Kevin, I might get you just to talk to the item 40 on page 75 about what the balance sheet separation would achieve for us. On the question of contestable advice, I guess the advice we're getting from our council officers may well be contestable against the advice that central government is giving. I'm not sure that we need outside advice on that, but if Kevin's on the line, can I get you to address the points that are made under point 40 about the impact of balance sheet separation, Kevin?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Hopefully you can all hear me there. I'll try it again. Is that clearer now?
That's a bit better, thank you.
Okay, right, yep. Look, so what 40 is talking about is there is uncertainty when it does come to the assessment of credit ratings, which then flow on to the potential implication of whether capacity will be created. At its core, we have worked on the basis that if Watercare's debt is taken off our books, then one of our credit agencies who incorporates Watercare's debt in their calculations would obviously recalculate one of their ratios, which is a single component of a series of components that make up our credit rating, but it is one of them. So that would obviously create a different ratio calculation, which would flow onto a credit rating, which does potentially create some capacity. We have another credit rating agency, though we do have two to access different parts of the international market, but also have two ratings to go and show that there's a robustness to the process we follow. And the second credit rating agency, which is Moody's, does not include Watercare in its calculations, both on the revenue and the debt side. So allowing for the fact that there's no strict formulaic approach to the credit rating assessments that we get, we cannot say categorically what the implication will be. At the worst case scenario, it may well be it does not create any additional capacity in our debt raising ability in the calculation, or it could be somewhere between that versus it does actually create capacity based on the magnitude of the debt that's coming off our books. So there's too much uncertainty there, so we can't actually assess that. When I do hear the comments from Councillor Walker there, I'm wondering if what you're actually talking about is options available as opposed to just the option put in front of us today. And look, we are exploring other options around the debt and how the calculations are undertaken. I think John Bishop is on the call. He may want to add something around the notion we are running some scenarios, and we'll move forward on those to actually try and get as much certainty as we can about the implications on our debt ratios.
John, are you on the line there?
Yes, I am.
Thank you. You might have to comment too,
Chair.
please.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, thanks. Look, just to reiterate on Kevin's point, look, this first point, as the analysis stands, just by separating out Watercare's balance sheet and maybe having, the Crown guarantee the debt or something similar to that, that in itself won't make any difference to how Moody's look at us, because they treat Watercare as self-funding and they separate out the revenue and their debt. So to reiterate Kevin's point, doing this, there is absolutely no guarantee that it will provide council itself any more debt capacity. And the second point about, what else can we do, what other options are there? And I think there's other options to explore in conjunction with this. And so we are undertaking a piece of work with both our rating agencies, it's Moody's and S&P, to have a look at how they would view our credit rating under a set of different scenarios, and they will include different debt and debt to revenue levels. And that piece of work will be done over the course of this calendar year to inform the next LTP.
Just a quick question in respect of that. Are you also looking at other options around Watercare? For example, a change to the legislation so that not only is Watercare self-funding, but able to increase its prices so that its circumstances actually better in that respect?
Not quite sure who the best person to answer that is. I think the short answer I've got, sorry, if I can just finish, please. The short answer that I have from a number of people is that while we have to be the lowest cost provider, that does not prohibit Watercare from raising its prices beyond where they are at the moment, if that is necessary to ensure the resilience and the quality of our water supply. But is there anybody else from our officers that would like to comment on that aspect?
I'll make a comment. Sorry for interrupting you. That was unintentional. I was just going to say that one of the recommendations in the CCO review report was that you'll remember that obviously developing a water strategy, as you've just referred to, Councillor Walker, they strongly recommended that was something the council needed to do, which is being progressed by staff. But as part of that, they did say that the council should have a broad influencing role over water prices. And that because obviously they affect many different outcomes that the council wants to achieve, not just its financial position, but they also affect what kind of demand there is for these services. So I think as that plays out, as well as the reform process plays out, then I think there will be, there will be the opportunity for council to have more of an influencing role in the pricing decisions. That's not to say that we would set exactly what the tariff is for water, but I think the council would have the opportunity to kind of, at least set the general direction of that.
Maybe Councillor Hills, it's this water strategy, we're going to your committee. I think you've made some requests for further information on that. Do you want to add anything further to the comments that have been made?
Yeah, no, I've been working with staff on, there's a water strategy in train, and there's really good progress with Watercare, and I know Linda knows all about that too. I was hoping to have a scoping report or update come to the September Environment and Climate Change Committee, but we might miss that, but we're hoping to get something up there as quick as we can. Otherwise, November will be definitely in an official capacity, but also there is maybe the opportunity for a workshop, as well as the other workshop that is it's still sitting under governing body, but potentially it should eventually come to environment and climate change on the supply and I can't remember the name of the actual workshop, but it's under governing body on the 22nd of September. And then I think, yeah, so there's a few things going on, but there is really good progress, and it's Patricia Reid, I think, is over it as well on the water strategy side of things. So yeah, it's not going as fast as I would like again, but I think there's really good progress, and Watercare are very connected with our staff now, so it's a good way forward. I have some personal views around this item, but I think it's kind of separate and connected. I kind of have some concerns about. I personally have some concerns about this process, that we end up being the losers from it, but that's quite separate from an overall water strategy for Auckland.
Yeah, what I want to do, we're at danger of being a little bit off-piste here. We're focusing on whether we continue to participate in this process, but it's good background material to know that these are the sort of issues that are being dealt with and will be considered by us in workshops and in Environment and Climate Change Committee. Okay, Chris Darby, next question.
Thanks, Mayor. Can I just have some clarification? In the A, it says we're agreeing in principle to participate. Why aren't we just participating? It's stage one. Why aren't we just saying that we're participating? It looks really hesitant. It looks like we're not quite actually in the room with whoever we're going to be with in the room. Why is it written that way?
Yeah, it doesn't need to be. We're agreeing to participate. I'm not sure that we need the word in principle there. So can we delete those words? Did you have further questions you wanted to ask, Councillor?
Maybe just, do I want me to make a very brief comment now, Mayor?
I'll leave it till comments. No, we'll run it together, because I haven't got any indication of people wanting to comment. So if you'd like to run the comment in with us together, and that applies to any other questioner. Councillor Darby.
Thank you, Mayor. Just going forward, Mayor, and you'll be in these discussions, I would be interested in how Auckland can actually contribute to the regions, the district councils and the regional councils that are to our north and south through this. I understand that they are so far behind where we are in water infrastructure, both supply and wastewater. So when you are having these discussions, I think there needs to be a preparedness to be open to how Auckland can contribute. And I'm very aware that Aucklanders, they have a strong ownership of Northland, the Thames Coromandel. If you look at Ngāpuhi, there's more Ngāpuhi Mata Waka in Auckland than there are in Northland. So there's these exchanges of people. It's not just a boundary north of Tahana and a boundary at the Bombays. So I'm very interested in our discussions that you'll be having, is to be having an openness to how we could contribute. And if that means 1 or 2 cents extra on our water to get them out of the dire situations they're in, I'd like to know about that. I think I'll make that point clear. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I'll take that question as coming to me. I agree that we shouldn't just be totally standoffish and say, sod off, we're fine, and to hell with the rest of the country. That's not my view at all, and it would not be a good look for us if we were to present ourselves in that way. Having said that, the discussions that I've had, albeit informal, with Watercare and others, suggest that the problems with infrastructure in Northland could be immense, requiring vast area, assets not as well maintained as ours, a lot of expenditure necessary. I believe, as a matter of fundamental principle, that if we are a local government spending money raised within our region, that money should be spent for the region and it's not our role to meet the equity needs of other regions that are well behind. That, in my mind, is a central government function, and I just get some worrying signals that they might help us out initially for the first year and then we're carrying it. When the government spends taxation to achieve equity, it raises it nationwide, and therefore it should spend it nationwide. But if we raise our money locally through rates and water rates, I don't believe it's within our remit to spend money raised in Auckland in other regions. In regard to the Waikato, yeah, look, we have a lot in common with the Waikato because we share the same watershed. And, you know, the water that we get from the Waikato River directly and the water that goes from the Waikato into the storage lakes, and some of those are in the Waikato region. And we're already doing work alongside Waikato District Council. That makes a lot of sense. But I'm really worried that we may be landed with a very large capital bill over time when we're struggling to meet the capital needs in our own region. So yes, you're right on the level that we should be there and say we're happy to work with government and with other regions and to do so cooperatively, but we need to make sure that a government, any government, that's not prepared to revenue share with us doesn't responsibility load us. And that's what I'm really worried about, Councillor, and I think probably others might share that view. Okay, Councillor Daniel Newman.
And I'm one of them. Thank you, Your Worship. I mean, I had a couple of questions here and a comment, and I guess my first question goes to, and it's either the officers, and thank you, Sarah, it's a very good report, or to you yourself, Your Worship. So in entering into this, have we got any more clarity yet as to, I mean, how does one, the cost to achieve comparative assets with respect to Three Waters, how does the cost of achieving comparative assets, quality class of assets at the time of potential merger get picked up, whereby I assume it will be the taxpayer or it will be ratepayers from other regions who will be coming into a potentially merged entity? Or are we facing a situation where you have a merged entity with differential price paths to reflect asset development and delivery within areas outside of Auckland? And I guess the reason I ask that question is about the need to try and avoid the moral hazard here, because there is a real risk that actually Watercare has a really good asset base, but there are areas to the north and south of us that do not. So what's the line of sight to ensure that we don't, as part of this process, end up having to pick up those costs, or that we don't pick those costs up initially because there's some startup seed funding, but within a short period of time, the Crown has geared out and it's the bulk of ratepayers in Auckland who end up picking up those costs? That's my first question.
Well, as I've already indicated, that's a fear that I have just from discussions with ministers, nothing explicit, but trying to follow body language and read between the lines. I'm not interested in seed funding and then loading us with a significant additional cost in terms of cross-subsidisation. But in case I've missed out on some of the discussions with officials, Sarah or Alastair, or is there anything further that you can add to that?
Through the chair, I'll have a go at this. If Auckland Council commits to stage one of this process, that stage involves effectively a show and tell with neighbouring councils about the state of their assets. It's an information sharing period, so the neighbouring councils can get an idea of what they would be getting into, the state of their neighbours' assets. Associated with this, the government has put up $760 million of funding for councils in this first phase of the reform process. and have indicated that there'll be further funding to come at the next two stages, although those will be decisions for the incoming government, so no commitment has been made to that. So I guess the visibility will come when Auckland Council, or if Auckland Council looks to opt into stage 2 of the process, because by then there would have been more detailed work done to understand the state of our neighbours' assets.
Okay, well, that stage 1 disclosure exercise, we're going to have a very good understanding, both at an officer and an elected member level, as to what the state of the assets are to the north and south of us. My next question: this is an opt-in for a national 3 waters reform program, so that includes stormwater. So, as I understand it, so Healthy Waters, in effect, is doing a lot of work funded by the Water Quality Target Rate, which is targeted. Auckland ratepayers are paying for it for a program of works hypothecated for our region. If we were looking at Healthy Waters going into a 3 waters program, I would assume that Healthy Waters would be subject to a regulatory regime that could also affect issues to do with stormwater price. I can see good points and bad to that, but how does that marry up with the water quality target rate that we have? Does that become subject to a regulatory regime external to Auckland, or is that separate?
Through the chair, the 3 waters reform program is slightly inappropriately named. It should perhaps be best described as a 2 waters plus possibly another water. Drinking water and wastewater are quite clearly in scope. There's been an awful lot of discussion about whether stormwater is to be included in the reform program, and all the arguments that you'll no doubt be familiar with about why that's complicated have raised their ugly heads. So it's in scope where appropriate. Look, all of those issues are being investigated by central government currently, and as part of the sort of policy work that will be done through stage 1 of this reform process, and the answers haven't been arrived at, but it's not a dead cert that stormwater would be included in any multi-regional water entity that would be set up. It would only be if it worked and made sense. If I'm sounding vague, it's because an awful lot of this work is yet to be done.
Yeah, well, work that makes sense. I'm not sure about that. Work to make sense to who, according to whose values and priorities. But thank you, Alastair, for that. Look, Your Worship, my comment around this is I think it's a very good thing to participate in, and if we weren't participating, more fool to us, because I actually think the water care model will be a model that government will want to see rolled out. I just see that the water care model, a lot of work's gone into making water care work for the Auckland region, and some people will agree that, well, of the view that it hasn't. I think it has, by and large. But I can see a lot of costs coming down the pipeline, and 760 million is nothing in the context of the kind of cost that will need to be met by ratepayers, taxpayers outside of Auckland, in order for Auckland to fully avoid the moral hazard of ending up picking up the cost of bringing failing assets or no services that to regions to the north and south of us, getting them to a water care type standard will be prohibitively expensive, I am sure, and I don't want my ratepayers in my ward to have to pick up the cost of that. That cost needs to be fairly allocated to the source of it, and the source of it are those communities that haven't got that infrastructure. and no inducement short of addressing the moral hazard to ensure that my ratepayers don't have to pick up the cost will be. We can't. We have to be very careful here that Aucklanders aren't the ones who are left picking up the tab for small councils, and that's where I can see this going. And I can see that this will be a matter which will be fraught, because I cannot see how you can't include stormwater in this conversation. And if you include stormwater in the conversation, then inevitably you have to put them into the conversation around pricing and around regulation and around the standard of assets that will be delivered, and that standard will have to be consistent, and it will be much higher than the cost that can be borne in those small councils to the north and south of us, Your Worship. So thank you for your discussion with ministers, but we can't be left to pick up the tab for the fact that other councils are too small to meet these costs.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and that, as you have worked out, concurs very much with my view that we should be cooperative, helpful, but not create any expectation that we're about to use money raised locally in Auckland to pay for significant infrastructure work in other regions. That's not how local government works. No other local government in the country does that. Right, we're on to comments, and the first was Councillor Newman. Second, Councillor John Watson.
Yeah, thanks, Vaughan. It'll be a pretty quick comment. I agree absolutely with what you've said. The list of risks seems to grow by the minute, and they've been all pretty carefully outlined here in terms of potential joint ownership or subsidising other councils. And as much as this seat at the table is meant to inform us better of our neighbours' position, I think we've got a pretty good idea of what our neighbours' position is, and it's a hang of a lot worse than ours. And even with ours, is that we're totally constrained and committed. So I'm hoping if this goes through, when we do get to the table, that one of our first statements is a pretty clear enunciation of what you've been saying, Mr. Mayor, so that there's absolutely no misunderstandings there in terms of any of the participants. In some respects, there's a danger there too of Auckland, especially given the shared nature of water source in the top half of the North Island, that we don't do our reputation as the big city slickers any good by making that clear or pulling the pin instead of saying it outright at the start. It's very hard for me, I think, to see any situation whereby the government will be being too generous to us in terms of water infrastructure, given how far behind everyone else is. So that just doesn't stack up. So I think we're being rather hopeful if we think there'll be anything in there for us other than the scenario that you've outlined. So I guess, yes, you're at the table, but the seat at the table might be of limited duration if it becomes clear that that's what the expectation is. And I wouldn't have thought it would take too long for that to emerge if it is. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Phil, I agree completely with the comments that you've made. I am incredibly concerned about this. I think there are huge fishhooks, both financial and also fishhooks around sustainability and climate change. So, for example, if we look at what the issue is here, and that is essentially that there is a capital deficit, that's a CapEx deficit, and an OpEx deficit as it goes to our neighbouring regions. If we look at the CapEx deficit, as far as Auckland is concerned, we have significant infrastructure growth charges. So are we proposing to have an additional infrastructure growth charge over and above the ones that we already have to subsidise Waikato and in particular Northland? From an OPEX perspective, are we proposing to have a significant increase in our water rates to subsidise the far higher operational costs? And those differences will be immense for Northland in particular. So what is the impact of those things? And that's why I ask for some information around contestable advice in advance of taking this conversation too far. And if we talk about stormwater, the costs around stormwater as climate change escalates, and it is doing that at a markedly accelerated rate. I mean, we have worst case scenario. The costs that we are going to face as a region alone in Auckland dealing with that are immense in terms of themselves. So I have a real concern that the officers give us some advice. If this issue, from our perspective, is just about debt, then what are all of the options around that as it goes to our relationship with Watercare and also our relationship with these rating agencies? And can we explore those? Because I think that the solutions are there within house rather than necessarily going to the government. That does not mean that Auckland can't offer something in terms of expertise as far as Watercare is concerned, and certainly also as far as Healthy Waters is concerned. But that's a different arrangement to, frankly, what will be a massive financial subsidy. So I support your position, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Last speaker I've got here is Richard Hills.
Thank you. And just basically we want to support what others have said, especially Councillor Newman earlier. I have real concerns about this, and I'm glad we're taking a cautious approach, because I do not want us taking the sugar pill of, or the sugar hit, sorry, not the sugar pill, the sugar hit of, getting some debt off our books, and then we end up with a long-term issue of using our balance sheet to somehow support a far greater area that we already cover with far smaller populations to support it. And not saying that we should throw our hands up and not help our neighbours, but we have clearly our own issues, and if we can help with expertise and policy and advice, and other areas can help us, that's fantastic. But I think the government needs to really step in those areas of need in Northland and the Waikato and other areas, and maybe we partner in some ways. But I am concerned that we see the shiny money at this stage, but long term our assets and the way we are able to renew them becomes a massive issue. So I'm happy to support this, to be kind of involved in the conversation, but I don't want us to make that short-term kind of decision to be really jumping into this, which long-term we end up being the ones who lose out here. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And one addition, Councillor Tracy Mulholland.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for your patience and my late note of comment. I also would like to raise the issue of, this relates to debt and good water management. Now, I do agree entirely on the principle that we need to be incredibly mindful that will we be falling into some sort of rabbit hole? And I see a statement that it would have to be a damn good prenuptial agreement, and I for one would know that if we were going into anything like this, we need to be very clear. So I support your position, Mayor, and I want it on record, my concerns around my ratepayers in the area and across from what I know of, the people that I've watched with feedback about water would not be willing to pay for other areas. But I do frequent going north and south, so I support our neighbours. I think we should work together with the intel we have, and to make sure that the collaborative approach means that everyone can move forward. So thank you for your thoughts on it, Mr. Mayor, because for me, we need to be very, very cautious. Kia ora.
Kia ora. I'm not going to take the prenuptial agreement through to develop that analogy at all, but you can probably think of what's on the top of my mind there. Look, there's just a couple of things I want to say in concluding. One, I think that stormwater will be too hard to put into that, and that's the message I'm getting informally from ministers as well. Secondly, far from us being seen as being too hard-hearted and selfish on this, just draw your attention to the work done by David Norman that suggests even though we're 34% of the population, we pay about 40% of the tax. And I don't mind the tax we pay being used for equity purposes across the country, but tax is nationally raised and nationally spent, and rates aren't. The other thing, and just to pick up Richard Hill's comment, one other option that the government could consider here is just to do what we're currently district council. We contract manage their water supplies. Yes, we do have the expertise, we do have the scale, we can provide it. We're not going to, use that position to screw money out of our neighbours. We will do it for them, we'll recover our costs, and we'll probably get a margin on top of that. But if they want to use our model, then use our model to contract management, for contract management of water supplies, maybe in Northland and in the Waikato. And that might be a different path that we could pursue, where we can provide assistance, be genuinely helpful and cooperative, but we're not actually having to use our already incredibly scarce capital investment resources to spend beyond our region. So that's kind of the path that I've taken to date with ministers. I don't always get a warm response to that, but I will continue to take that, and I want to thank the supportive comments that have been made by councillors around that. I need to know that I have the support of the governing body when I go into those sort of discussions, and I take it from this discussion that I do. So it's been moved by me, seconded by Councillor Angela Dalton, the recommendations A to E. I'll put those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no.
Aye.
Sorry, there is a no? Or was I just catching the last of the ayes there?
I said no, Phil.
Sorry?
Wayne Walker said no.
Oh, okay, thank you. So we'll, if you wish, we'll register your dissent on that vote, Councillor Walker. Okay, I'll declare that carried. We come now to the last substantive item on the agenda, and it's nearly 3:30. So we'll work through this one as quickly as we can, and that is in relation to the relationship agreement between Auckland Council, Watercare, the Waikato Regional Council, Waikato Tainui, and the Waikato River Authority. I have online, just to double check, Megan Tyler and Bram Van Mel. Bram and Megan, are you both there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And Megan has just suggested that I introduce this one. Thank you, Megan. This is, I was going to say, reasonably straightforward. It's not entirely, but I think the recommendations that we're putting forward are the path that we need to go down. This is not a legally binding agreement, and it's not a substitute for going through the normal consent process for water take from the Waikato, and it's not a constraint from us going through that consent process. But what it does commit us to is a close and genuine relationship with Waikato Tainui and the other authorities, and trying to seek a consensus outcome to future abstraction of water from the Waikato. When I went down there on a number of occasions, people talked to me about the former Mayor of Manukau, Sir Barry Curtis, descending on the Waikato from his helicopter, making all sorts of commitments and then not being seen again. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not. That might be grossly unfair to Sir Barry, but the impression that I gained, and you would have seen from public comments, was that Auckland wants to take, but it never wants to give back. And, I don't think that's a genuine reflection of our position, but it's something that we have to address as a hindrance to our proceeding with gaining the water supply, at least in the medium term, that we need from the Waikato. So what it sets out in its purpose is that the need for Auckland and the Waikato region to have sufficient water to sustain and support our communities, and that the health and the well-being of the river is paramount. Now, I've said many times to the people in the Waikato in seeking their agreement for additional consents is that nothing that we do, I believe, will damage the health and the well-being of the Waikato, and to the contrary, we are prepared to, if we're taking from the Waikato in increasing amounts, to put back into restoring the health and well-being of the river. So the agreement which is attached, you can see it sets out the parties, it sets out the context for the agreement, and you'll note that particularly from the Māori perspective, they are very keen that we acknowledge that this is not simply about environmental matters, but acknowledges the spiritual and cultural significance of the awa to the River Iwi. But it does acknowledge our need for water supply, and what we have gained from our 3 meetings in the Waikato is an understanding that the 25 million litres from Hamilton will be supported by the Waikato Regional Council and by Waikato Tainui, that the 100 million litres in the winter season will also gain a favourable response from our colleagues in different parts of the Waikato, and that they will concur with our take of another 50 million litres from a third party that has a consent for allocation that they do not currently use. So the quid pro quo is that we offer to work in a consensual way with them, so it's not us coming down with a high sense of entitlement and taking a resource which is theirs, but working together with them to meet the dual needs of their region and our region, noting that the Waikato Tainui extends right up into Manarewa, the well-being of the people in Tamaki Makaurau is also the well-being of the Waikato Tainui people and other iwi. So I think the recommendations basically set out acknowledging cooperation and goodwill of our partners in the Waikato, though sometimes public statements maybe fall a little short of that, and to delegate to myself, the Deputy Mayor and the Chief Executive Officer to finalise and enter into the agreement. I'm happy to take questions, or for officers to take questions at this stage. Just to note, my latest update from Watercare is that we should have the consents next week, is the undertaking, for the 25 million litres a day and the 100 million litres a day. And in terms of the new treatment plant, the site has been cleared at Tuakau. The earthworks are underway. The plant design is progressing, and the critical components are being purchased at the moment. And Watercare will enter into a bilateral agreement with the Waikato groups for the setting up of a river restoration trust, and they have already placed or offered seed funding of 1.5 million into that, which will go up to 5 million, and the trust will consist of the River Iwi and the Waikato Regional Authority, not the Waikato Regional Authority, the Waikato River Authority and Watercare itself. Now, Megan or Bram, is there anything that I've missed out in that introduction that you'd like to add to?
Nothing from me.
Yeah, and nothing from me either.
Thank you. Well, look, I'll move and ask Linda Cooper if she will second the motion. Linda, are you happy to do that?
Aye, yes, please. Acknowledging the work that you and the Deputy Mayor have done.
Thank you very much for that. And we'll now open it up for questions and then comments. And the first question I have is from Councillor Angela Dalton. Angela.
Thanks, Your Worship. And yes, congratulations
focused on this. This is really good to see. My question is, who from our side monitors the outcomes? I understand the relationship, it's not a binding thing, but how do we make sure that we are doing our bit to deliver?
I think
specifically on the restoration of the Waikato River?
Yeah, the primary monitoring of that will be through Watercare, who will have a place on the trust that they are funding. So the funding is coming from Watercare rather than from the council. But Megan, I imagine that you'll be working closely, your team will be working closely with Watercare in respect of those different elements of the relationship. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, through the Chair, you're absolutely right. Also, as you can imagine, the Waikato Regional Council has a regulatory role, so they'll also be involved in the monitoring, and no doubt the River Authority as well, which has a statutory role in the restoration of the awa too. So look, there's a number of parties, and I guess that's why this is a relationship agreement with 5 of us. We'll all have a role to play, and I know that we will be held accountable in a positive sense to this. So yes, there's a number of monitoring methods that will be used going forward.
And just a supplementary, please. So as the parent, Auckland Council is signing this, so there will be something between Auckland Council and Watercare to ensure that Watercare, who I have no doubt will deliver, but that is clear. I don't know if it goes in the statement of intent or where it goes, but it needs to be somewhere.
Thank you, Councillor
Would you like to comment on that, Megan?
Sure. Look, I'll happily take that away. I have not been talking to or considering any additional kind of MOU or agreement with us in Watercare around this. Watercare already do work to assist the awa and work with iwi and the Regional Council. So in a sense, it's no different. It's some additional work. But I'll certainly look and work with Alastair's team around statements of intent or the most appropriate place for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you very much. I have no other questions, but I have a request for a comment from Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And you've probably said some of the things I was going to say anyway, especially around the commitment by Watercare to create a new trust to endow with money that can help restore the awa, and that's part of the good faith in which we go into this agreement. There has been a few bit of rah-rah about different organisations wanting that, but I think because it is our ratepayers' money through their water rates, that it's a really good way to have an individual trust with several members from different organisations that make sure that the money's used for the intent that it was put there for. I want to thank you and the Deputy Mayor for a lot of the work you've done, because with the Waikato Regional Council, they've been very selective about who and how many people they want, and so I haven't been involved beyond the Hamilton discussions. I think right from the beginning of these discussions, we've gone into this with good faith. We've worked really well with Watercare on it, and I want to acknowledge Margaret Devlin for her part in this. It's been also part of that building that relationship with one of our CCOs. So I have to give you and the Deputy Mayor a lot of credit for helping to build that, and also damping down some of the difficult conversations that have had to have, or addressing those around one iwi Waikato Tainui wanting our people to be paying $2,000 on their rates bill every month for the privilege of using Waikato water. And I think what we really have to acknowledge is that our take is at the end of the line. So we're not taking from anybody else that wouldn't get it before us, and we get the water that needs the most treatment. So we do have to have some significant investment into another region to provide water, clean, safe water for our region. So I think this is a really good outcome. And as I say, I think going into it with good faith with all parties is a credit to our council and to Watercare. I think that's the good part about this, and it might put paid to the maybe mistrust that people in the Waikato might have had of Auckland previously, that we can put our best foot forward and act with integrity at the same time looking after our people's needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda, and thanks to you and to Richard Hills and Bill Cashmore and David Typry, who have participated in different stages of this. And as we discussed in an earlier paper, it has been about building relationships. And, you know, we have moved from a situation where we had some outrageous demands that we would be the only drawer on the river that would pay for it, and what was it, $20 million a week or something. Yeah, those sort of things have been buried, as they properly should. But we do have to acknowledge the Maori dimension in this Te Ture Whaimana, the vision and the strategy for the river that is set out in the settlement agreement for the setting up the Waikato River Authority. That point was made very clearly and very strongly to us. Okay, the last question or comment I've got is Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. So I just want to speak in support of one of the matters that's in the agreement, and that's 6.1H. That is Auckland Council and Watercare continuing with their water conservation measures. And just in that respect, Mr. Mayor, in the Waikato, and that is also in Hamilton, they have more nuanced water conservation measures than we have in Auckland. And even though they have drought circumstances, they don't ban the use of outdoor hoses for cleaning homes. So I would hope that we could actually learn something from the, I would suggest, improved approach that Waikato has around conserving water, and that we don't lose sight of saving water, particularly the massive amount of leakage that we have that could amount to as much as 20 or 30% in parts of Auckland. So let's not lose sight of what we need to do to conserve and live within our means so that we don't need to use the water from the Waikato. And I'm sure that the Waikato councillors would be very happy with that.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Okay, look, I'll put those recommendations, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Cooper. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no. I declare that carried. Is there anybody wishing to register their dissent on the resolution? We'll declare that carried unanimously. We come to item number 16. If no officers available to talk to this, it's simply to note the progress on the forward work program and to receive a summary of memoranda and briefing. Can I get somebody to move and second that, please?
Happy to move.
Happy to second.
I have a question.
Okay, sorry, just get who the mover was.
Chris Fletcher.
Councillor Fletcher, and seconded by Councillor Angela Dalton, was it I heard? I'll take that as read. Okay. Question, Councillor Walker.
So one of the items that's in the attachment is the confidential workshop that we had with Watercare. Is it possible to have notes from these confidential meetings made public, because they're in the public interest? And that is against a background where we do not appear to have formal reporting to Council around circumstances to do with our water crisis, even though it's of the utmost urgency. Can we make what we can public?
The difficulty we have in that, Councillor, is that when people speak in the workshops, they speak under the understanding that what they are saying is confidential. And I can't retrospectively remove that assurance from councillors. We can, as I think we altered the standing orders earlier, decide that there are particular workshops that can be held in public, and I think the time to make that decision is at the start of the workshop, so everybody knows the rules of the game before they participate in it. But, you know, obviously things that come out of that workshop will find their way into the papers that we then discuss and move recommendations on for action. So that's probably the way to do that. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no. Carried. Item number 17 is extraordinary business. None has been received. So I want to thank members of the governing body for a pretty hard day's work and a very constructive day. So thank you very much for that. It is raining outside. You're probably at home, so you don't need to worry about driving safely through it. But we hope the rain continues. We're up to 65.5% as of this morning. If I don't meet up with you tomorrow, all the best for the weekend, and look forward to seeing everybody in person, God willing, inshallah, from next week. Thank you very much. I declare the meeting closed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.